To learn how I can better listen, today I'm talking to Corine Jansen. And Corine is an expert of listening. She works as a speaker, as a trainer, and an assessor in the field of listening, all focused on helping people to listen better. And her focus is not only to listen to people, but actually to listen with them. And I have a question about this later, because this is an interesting point for me. She has taught about the importance of listening in the context of healthcare at Radboud University in Nijmegen, is the co-founder of the Narrative Healthcare Network, and co-founder of Netherlands Listens, which is a platform that aims to instill curiosity and openness instead of polarization and invites us to listen. And while doing some research, I actually realized that today, or this month, is the month of listening, Netherlands Listens. So that's interesting. That's 9 years ago, Corine also founded her own practice, JoConnect, focusing on listening, opening conversations, and becoming more human together. Corine, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me about listening. I hope to do a lot of listening today and ask you some hopefully good questions. If it's okay for you, the first question, I would like to actually start with a personal question. Because the thing is, I've looked into you and I found you obviously because you have done a lot of work in the field of listening. So I was curious to find out what happened to you that made you decide and dedicate so much attention to this topic of listening. Can you share some of that?
Well, I think my answer needs to be separated in two parts. It's just one part from my history, and it's just one part which is a coincidence. When you look at my history, I grew up with a mother with a personality syndrome, borderline personality syndrome. And it means that you really need to focus not only on the language, but also on the tone, the words, the eyes, and the body language of a person to be safe or to be, well, to protect yourself, because you not always know how people with a disorder will respond to you if you say something, do something. So I was very focused on a young age. I didn't know that at the moment because I was still very young. But when my father died, I was 16 years old and my mom became more ill. And so the circumstances were really challenging sometimes. And at that time, I realized communicating is not only about language, it's so much more. Yes. Yeah. And I started studying communication, and that was really a coincidence. But my mentors told me, you are a real good communicator, so do something with that. So I did. But still then, at that moment, I was a little bit arrogant. I thought I studied communication, so I know how the world look and how you need to do it. And I think I was at the age of maybe 34, 35, when I realized that as a communicator, it's not only about giving people your message, but it's about receiving information. And I think that was the first time I started my interest in listening to different people. I did some courses, and my most important course was becoming a mediator. And in that course, I learned the importance of asking good questions to try to build bridges between people who don't agree with each other. And I think that was really the point where I start thinking, what are the possibilities on listening? And I started working at a broadcast, and I was really curious, who are the listeners? Who are the viewers of our programs? And that was the first time I really did it as a job. Who are you? What are you doing? Why? When? What? And it was the Radboud University Medical Hospital who sent me a message by Twitter in 2009 or 8. No, I think it was 9. And they asked me, would you like to become our chief listening officer?
That's a great title.
And that was really a coincidence because, yeah, well, I felt very, very bad about the title at that point.
Big responsibility.
I wasn't chief of anybody. I knew at that moment it was a strange title, and I could get a lot of comments, and people were asking questions. Oh, what kind of, it's a strange title, you know. But then, well, I just started, and I found out how difficult it is, but also how beautiful it is to do. And I think in 2012, I went to Canada to give a lecture about listening to young people with cancer. Mm-hmm. And then I met people from all over the world who were involved in the field of listening in different ways. And I thought, oh dear, this is like home. This is where I belong. And so the journey started. Yeah.
Interesting. So in part, it was your desire to better understand your mother, I imagine, and to have a better relationship. Probably that's the underlying motivation. And then your work that kind of evolved and kind of pulled you into the arena of listening.
Yeah. And I have to admit, Julius, that I didn't understand at that time that while I was listening, I couldn't understand her, and I found out years and years later. And she died almost 25 years ago. But I think that was the moment I realized it's not possible to ever understand another person completely, but you can try and have the right intention to come as close as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, because we all have our unique experiences, and we all have our unique history and encounters that shaped us and are still shaping.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. On your website and also on LinkedIn, there's a lot of mentioning of narrative listening. Of course, I Googled it, and I did some research, and I found all kinds of definitions. But could you please explain what this is exactly, narrative listening, and why is it important?
I use the word narrative listening because I think the most important part of listening to people is to give them the comfort and the trust to share stories. Mm-hmm. Because people live through stories. We all have so many stories, small stories, large stories, stories which continue, stories which end. And I found out that if you are capable to listen to a person's story, at first you need to have a lot of self-reflection. Mm-hmm. You also need to have critical attention. And then you need curiosity and creativity. Mm-hmm. And these skills are part of a narrative. So that's more than just a story. It's a way to behave, a way to relate to other people. Mm-hmm. And that's why I came up with the thought of you can listen to another person, but you can also listen with another person. Yes. And I found out during my work in elderly care, especially with people with dementia or brain damage, that it's really hard to listen to them, and that it's better to listen with them. Because then you become part of their journey through their own narrative. Mm-hmm. And when you are listening to a person, you can hear the other person's story. And of course, you can ask clarify questions. But especially when people don't have a direct way of communicating, it's important to stay with them.
Because of the dementia, you mean? And then
yeah, because of well, not only with dementia, but also people with post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Sure, yeah.
They don't share their narrative in a linear way. It's chaotic. There's so much going on in the brain.
Yeah.
And when you just start listening to them, you get lost.
Yeah.
So listening with them needs the narrative skills, the skills of being with them and move with them through their journey. So I think every human being can have once a time at least in their life when their mind is chaotic, when their mind is not linear, they don't know, they share different parts from different parts of their lives. It's not a coherent story. And I think that for me is the highest level of listening, being with them and being confused with them, but also don't judge them because of their confusion.
Yeah.
And so I use the word narrative because when people are sharing a story, it can be just a story. But when people share their narrative, I need my skills to be with them. And that's harder than just listening to a story.
But then what is the difference between a narrative and a story?
Well, some people use them in the same way. But for me, using narrative means that there is a layer, that it's stratification. And I am always searching to the stratification of a human being, but I'm also searching for the stratification in myself to become a better listener. And so we can all choose to listen to a story, but listening to a narrative and listening in a narrative way means vulnerability, also means courage, and also means training these skills on and on and on and on, because the more you train the skill of your narrative, so self-reflection, critical attention, creativity, I think the wider your perception on the world will be, and the less judgments and assumptions you will have. Well, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I find it very interesting that you say this, and also that you introduce it by the concept of people experiencing or having dementia, and because of that not being linear and being chaotic in their communication. I think the first thing that came to mind, I don't have dementia, but I know that I too am sometimes very chaotic in my thinking and even in my communications, and I like to think that I'm quite a good communicator, but still I catch myself a lot. It's all mixed together.
Yeah.
So I can really relate to the importance of this listening with somebody. And also because as you asked me just before we started, what are the things that I've come across so far? You asked me about the similarities between the different interviews that I've had or the different topics that I've researched. And I mentioned being present. And I imagine that also with regard to listening with someone, it's actually about being present together. As you mentioned, being present together where someone gets lost, and that's okay, and you not to have judgment about it. Yeah, I think it's a very valuable skill. So what can we do to improve us being with the person and listening with them? What is things that we can do that helps them also feel safe? I think you mentioned feel trusted.
Well, you don't have to share that I am listening with you. You just need to be there. But to become better in being in the present with someone and listening with them, I learned, but I still learn a lot from the art of the humanities. So I am going quite often to expositions, to see art, to listen to music. I read a lot of philosophy, especially Stoic philosophy. That's my greatest interest.
It's another topic, by the way, that came. I've already had 2 interviews relating to Stoicism.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah. I'll send you some links. It is. Yes.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. So I read a lot of philosophy, but I also read poems, literature, and try to do a lot of close reading or close seeing, like close listening. And what I try to do is I see listening like a muscle you can train, because it's a cognitive process. And I try to train my muscle by using the art of the humanities. And if you are have the intention to be open for this kind of thoughts, this kind of art, this kind of way of to express yourself, it makes you, well, it makes me more grounded. And because I'm more grounded, I'm breathing easier, and I'm more in the present. And when I am more in the present, and when I am breathing more easily, I am just there, and I'm just there for the other. And I think that is what the other person is feeling and experiencing. It's not just I see you, but I feel you.
Yeah.
And also people with dementia, or people like you with chaotic mind. I also have a very chaotic mind. They want to relax. They want to be present. They want to release the stress and all the thoughts. And you can offer them that by listening.
Yeah. Yeah, and by being with them, and and not having them experience any pressure or judgment. Ideally, of course, this is hard, but it's definitely something that really helps to open people up.
Yeah. And I think we often, and that's very human, it's very, very human, give people advice or show people another roads, or give them a solution for something. But that's not what listening is about. Listening is just being there and try to understand as best as possible what the other wants to explain or wants to express. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. 2 things that I want to ask more about. Critical attention is something you mentioned. I want to hear more about that. But before we go there, you also mentioned the art of the humanities. Can you say some more about that and how this helps you be a better listener and be more open to, I guess, the diversity that is out there?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, Julius, that watching an art piece with others can make an art piece more beautiful than ever. Because what I see in an art piece is just my view on the piece, but on the colors, but also it says something about my own worldview. And talking with others about what do you see, what do you experience, do you get goosebumps or not? Do you like it? Does it give you some memory, or does it give you a feeling? That opens up your perspective. And well, just a few weeks ago, I visited a man with brain damage, and he had a painting in his room, and he could communicate, but he was not very open to communicate. So I looked at this painting and I said to him, that's a painting about the island of death. And he said, do you know it? And I said, yes, I know it. And I said, let's look together to this painting. So we were looking at the painting and I asked him, what do you see? And he told me what he saw, but I saw something different. So I asked him about the color, which color? And it's a real dark, but also a real light color in this painting. And he was only seeing the black tones in the painting. And then the question came up. The name of the painting is about death. Do you think often about death? And then he told me, yeah, I really would end my life because I'm done. And then through just looking to a painting and not confronting him with my thoughts or with my ideas, but just asking him through a painting where he was with his pain, where he was with his sadness, opened him up. And he told me about his suicidal thoughts. And we were not talking about him directly. We were talking about suicidal thoughts through the painting.
Yes, through the painting. Yeah.
And it makes him comfortable to talk about it. And it opened up my perspective of how people with suicidal thoughts can experiencing colors, light, and also figures on a painting, which I didn't notice at the moment. So using the art of the humanities, and it's the same with poems. When people are reading a poem and you ask, what do you think when you read these words? They can come up with religious, with spiritual thoughts, or with a reference to their own life. And so the art of the humanities taught me that there is more to see, and that what I see, what I hear, what I experience is just one perspective.
Yes.
It's not the truth.
Yes.
It's just a perspective. And in listening, it's vulnerable, and it takes courage to listen, because it can change you. And if you have the intention that what I'm telling is not the truth, but only my perspective, the art of the humanities it made me a richer person. It made me richer.
Yeah. I like what you say, having the courage that it can change you. I think this is, we're often very stuck in our own narrative and in our own perceptions of what is right and wrong, etc., and what is true and what is not true. But if we have the courage to have your opinion changed, I think this is a great thing. I've experienced this a lot when traveling, just that there's not one truth. There's so many different views, and it's also relative, actually. It's all just a matter of fact where you're standing.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I think it was in the Marcus Aurelius. He has one phrase in his book, when he say, when you just look at the sky at night, you see all those stars, you feel that you're just a dot in the world. And that's what we need to experience much more, because we are screaming as human beings, and we think, especially in the West, we think we know how the world rules. I traveled a lot too. And one thing I learned is I don't know anything.
Yeah, we have no clue.
No, I don't have any clue. I'm just a dot on this Mother Earth. And I have my own responsibility being that dot on Mother Earth. But the arrogance we have sometimes as human beings, and especially in the Western, is amazing, you know. It's horrible.
I guess it just shows we're absolutely not being present with ourselves or with our context around us. Otherwise, we would not dare to be arrogant. I went through your LinkedIn profile, and I've read a lot of very interesting things. And one thing that stood out was a statement that people express themselves in unique ways, obviously, but also, and this is the interesting part, that we also listen in different ways. Different people hear in different ways and habitually listen to and for different types of information. And I don't know, it was a refreshing thing to read. It's obviously true, I believe.
It is.
I know that I sometimes have an agenda I catch myself having an agenda in my listening, that I'm looking for certain validation or I don't know, instead of actually being present and listen. So could you share more about how people listen differently and how this actually impacts our communication?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit there are a lot of assessments through the years about listening and how to listen, and a lot of people did a lot of research about are you listening in time, or are you listening for activities, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was 2018. I was in Dublin with the International Listening Association.
Mm-hmm.
And Graham Bodie was there too. And Graham Bodie is one of the top researchers together with Avi Kluger
Mm-hmm.
in the world for me. And Graham told me, I am doing a scientifically research on a listening assessment. And I think it's very interesting for you to learn about that and to start using it in Europe. And I was really curious, but if Graham asked me something, you listen, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I'm curious, let me know. And I started the course in 2018, I think, yeah. And what Graham found out is that we have 4 pillars in how we listen. It can be connective, it can be reflective, it can be analytical, or it can be creative. But they found out during the research that there are 43 different profiles. So everyone has something of every pillar, but you have really 43 different combinations.
Of the 4, yeah.
Of the 4. And well, he worked with that with students, and they found out they worked together with the ECHO group in the United States. And I did the course, and I found out that it's not a personality test. It's also not a behavior test. It's a cognitive test. How do you process the information you get by listening? And the way you process this information has influence on the way you ask people questions to have a better understanding. And so I started, and I, of course, did my own profile. And then I experienced, this is really something beautiful. This can be so helpful. So I started with my clients to find out if it can be helpful not to only have your personality test and your behavioral test, but also your cognitive test. And what we know now is that you can, if you listen to me, you can paraphrase in a totally different way than I would do about the same story we are listening to. Yeah. And that's not because I'm a better or less listener than you, but I am listening differently. And I truly believe, Julius, that if we accept that we are all listening in a different way, we can respect each other much more, but we can also have less conflicts, because a lot of people say, you don't listen to me. This is not what I wanted to share. But maybe it's just that the other person was really listening to you,
but in a very different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see it a lot in well, couples. We have a lot of divorces in our country.
Yes.
And a lot of these divorces are about communication too.
And we don't feel heard or understood.
Yeah. And I don't think we can solve all this, but if you know from yourself, and that's the way, that's why I think it's so important to have a lot of self-reflection. The more you understand about yourself, about your allergies, about the importance of your past in the present, but also how you listen, it can create better communication between everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that recognizing that people listen very differently is probably an immensely helpful thing also towards ourselves, reflecting on ourselves, because I imagine this to be a very subconscious process until we realize that this is actually a thing. What can we do as a speaker when we're speaking with someone in this regard, recognizing that people might listen differently than we think they would? Is there something that we can do in order to make the process go more fluent, if I can put it like that?
Well, I don't think it's the responsibility of the speaker. It's the responsibility of the listener. Because as a listener, you only need to make the choice to really listen. So your intention needs to be with the other. And if the other is sharing something emotional or something full of happiness or full with sorrow, you can train to be with the other and try to find out what it is, what the other person needs at that moment. So, for example, I have the profile to have, well, my preference is connective listening. So I like to connect with everyone I'm speaking and listening to. But if I'm talking to someone who likes only facts and figures, and I stay with my own preference, I will not truly connect with the other person. So then,
good example.
And then I need, as a listener, to ask other questions to the speaker so he or she felt more heard. Because if I stay in my own preference, it's about me. And listening is not about me, listening is about the other. So you can train also to recognize, and well, I can give one podcast about that. I need to recognize, okay, this person is sharing a story with me about facts and figures. So I need to ask other questions. And because it's not my preference, it's hard work for me as a listener. But listening is not easy. It takes a lot of energy. It gives you a lot, but it also takes you a lot of energy.
Maybe this relates to what you said earlier, the critical attention. Can you say something more about that?
I love the sign of listening of the Chinese. They have beautiful.
I wanted to ask you about that actually too, because it's on your website. It's beautiful. It has all these elements, but what is the sign itself? The sign,
well, it means listening. It means listening.
That's what it means.
Yeah, but what the Chinese people say in this beautiful sign, that listening is not only about hearing, it's about seeing, it's about being present.
Yes.
It's being there with your heart, with compassion. So it is always you as your own instrument. And when I am talking about critical attention, you need to pay critical attention to yourself. So do I smell something which involves my listening? Do I don't like his glasses or his shoes? Or is there something in the room which distracts me? So you need to have close attention to yourself. Am I here at the right place? Can I make the choice to listen? Do I really want to be there for the other person? And again, you also need to have critical attention to what the speaker is saying. And you don't need only to listen to the words, but you need to listen to the tone, to the breathing. When is the speaking stopping a little bit? Is someone looking at the sky, or is someone looking at me? Is the person talking in the I or in the we, or in the past or in the present? And that is the critical attention I mean. So it's about yourself. How am I as a listener today at this moment? But also, what is the speaker saying, and what is he or she not telling you? But can I read between the lines? And is it safe enough? And is it is it my choice to ask something about that?
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in healthcare. I still work in care. And when people are crying when they're sharing a story, I always ask them, where are you when you are crying?
Mm.
And sometimes they are 30, 40 years away in the past. And sometimes they are getting a memory while speaking, because while speaking and thinking and giving words or expression to your narrative,
Yeah.
something is changing.
Yes. It's a really great question. Where are you now when you're crying in that moment? Yeah, it's definitely a great question. Also, I mean, this again is this chaotic process that through our talking, we actually become articulate as to what we are experiencing instead of having a linear monologue already ready. It's at least for me, it's always a process where things come out while I start talking. And I'm sure that this is the same for many people.
Yeah, and listening is part of a dialogue.
Yes.
So only being quiet doesn't mean that you are listening.
No.
And that's the beauty of the sign of the Chinese, that they are able to see listening as the process as I love it. Yeah.
It's I tried to use the Google because I have the Google Translate app, and it also has this thing that if you move it over a sign. So I tried to actually move it over your sign this morning on that picture because I wanted to know what was the sign itself, but it's the sign of listening. I didn't realize that. Yeah. But it's great with all these elements because indeed I think they're right. They're all such critical elements of listening. Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah. So they're ahead on us in that regard for sure. Yeah. Another thing that stood out when I was going through your LinkedIn profile was that you're mentioning non-directive invitation to speak. And I really like that because I think that we, in many cases, when we ask questions, are already very much steering the direction towards what we want to hear in a way. So how do we do that, and how can we invite non-directively people to speak, and why is this important in your view?
Well, I think that every human being wants to be heard.
Yes.
Every human being.
And seen. Yeah.
It doesn't matter in what way. Everyone needs to be heard. Everyone needs to be seen. And we all want to be understood, and we all want to understand. And well, let's talk about my own mind. My own mind is thinking in words, but also thinking in images, and I combine it sometimes. So my ways of sharing stories is almost never linear. Yeah. And sometimes I don't know words. I don't know how to express. And then it's interesting to see how you can express and how can you listen to it. I had a lady, and I think that's a really beautiful example of a non-directive way of communicating. She didn't speak at all. She has an illness. She had an illness, and she was sitting on her bed, and she was just watching straight ahead. She was just looking straight ahead, nothing else. And I was sitting aside, and I thought, I don't know how to connect with you. What should I do to connect with you and to let you self-express? So very intuitively, I just started to sit next to her on her bed, just to have a view what she was seeing when she was sitting over there. And I saw that she was watching at the brown closet. And I just asked her to give me her hand, and I took her to the closet. And at that moment, Julia, she was touching the closet like this. And I thought, this is really very interesting. What would she mean with doing this? And so I was searching in her apartment, and I saw a book full of art and full of colors. And I asked her, what kind of color do you like? Maybe she liked brown a lot, and that's the way why she was watching it. But she was pointing at white. And I thought, well, that could be coincidentally. So I took another book and another page, and she was permanently pointing to the color white.
So she did understand your questions you were asking.
Yes,
but
she couldn't talk. And so I said to her, do you like to paint? But she was just watching at me, but she didn't have words because she couldn't talk anymore. And then I went to the management of the apartment complex, and I said, do you have something which we can use for this closet, because there is something on with this closet? And so they give me a schuurpapiertje.
Sanding paper.
Sandy paper, thank you. Yeah. And she was starting rumbling at the closet. And I thought, oh dear, this is what she wants. She wants to paint the closet. And 14 days later, she painted the closet white. And after that, her eyes were more happier. She was more relaxing in her own apartment because that closet had the wrong color.
Such an intrusive, dark closet. Yeah.
And so what I mean with listening to people with a non-directive way to communicate is to be creative, and that's the narrative skill, to be creative, to find a way to communicate with another person. And that's always possible in any way, but you have to find the right tips, the right ways in which that person feels herself, in this case, heard and seen as a living human being, not happy with a brown closet.
Yeah, but it requires immense creativity, I imagine, to arrive at this actually answer, at least, especially with someone who is not able to talk or to communicate verbally. Yeah,
that's right. And that's what we call a narrative skill. And that's why I'm not talking about stories, but I need to look down in her stratification as a person when she was able to talk, but still she was alive. So I need to use my skills, my narrative skills, to get an entry to her world.
Yeah. Yeah, another great example. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I love, because I can talk a lot about theory, but stories,
they bring them to life. Yes. Yeah. So with our partners and our family and our lovers, our loved ones, people that are close to us, listening becomes especially important, but especially also equally challenging. And with those people, we tend to have something at stake, or we are emotionally involved, or we are hurt, or we get hurt. And when we're emotional, at least I know that I have this problem, I tend to be unable to fully listen, because at the same time, my heart is racing around in my head, and all my own stories and my injustices and all these things, or injustices, want to come out. So what can we do to improve our listening in this regard when our emotions are kind of taking over, or when our hurt is taking over? I know actually through your work in the healthcare arena, you've also worked a lot with communication in the context of pain. What can we do when we experience pain or hurt or all these emotions, and then still continue to be able to listen as best as we can to what the other person has to share with us?
Sharing that you are feeling pain.
Yeah.
It's really easy, but it's also very difficult.
Yeah.
When you look to siblings or your partners, we think we know them. So we think we know what they mean when they talk to us and share stuff with us. That's not the case. We are really unique, and every person will change through times and will change through new encounters, to new experiences. So yes, we know our partner, but we still need to stay curious. And when we in a battle about something at home, and we get hurt, we don't share, I'm hurt, you are hurting me. We need to talk about the I feel hurt,
Yes.
not you hurting me. No, I feel hurt.
Correct.
But we don't say that quite often. We are starting a fight, but you and you and you.
And putting the responsibility with the other person.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when we talk about response in the listening field, it's about, I hear you saying this, and this hurts me, and I feel hurt right now. Then you stay with the other, but you also mention what the language she is using or he is using means to you. And that is really difficult, but also very vulnerable, but at the same time very powerful.
Yes.
You can't say you do this or you mention this or you mean that, because you don't know. What you experience is that it hurts you. And just saying, I am listening to you and I feel it hurts me. Then you have respect, you are in balance with each other.
Yes.
And you can be both in a dialogue instead of a fight.
Yes. And it helps you to stay present by the process of getting over it. Because actually another topic that I've researched is honesty. And I interviewed the director of this Radical Honesty enterprise. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with the book by Brett Blanton, Radical Honesty. Basically, their concept of radical honesty is to express honestly in the moment, whatever it is that you're experiencing from moment to moment towards the other person, not to convince them of anything or not to make them wrong for anything or whatever. Just by simply expressing what you're experiencing helps you get over it. And that allows you to be in the present moment again. And then you can be with that person listening. So I think it's a great approach. And
here you see that the present, being present, but also listening with your heart. Well, it is vulnerable, but if you are able to talk about the I and being in the present and not mentioning stuff from 10 years ago, but being in the present right now, there will be no fights, and there can be a dialogue, and you don't have to agree, but at least you are connected with each other again. And I think that is what we want. We don't need to have only people who agree with us, because that would be really boring. But respect and trust with each other, that you are honest in being present, and that you are not judge the other for what they are feeling, but that you can only say, this is what I am feeling right now at this moment. I truly believe, Julius, that everyone who is sharing their emotions and feelings, whatever they did in life, even if they kill someone, if you understand their narrative and their feeling, why they did it, how they did it, what made them doing it, when you are honest and when you are really trying to understand, you will have a connection even with a murderer.
In the end, we're all human beings. And we've all had our moments, and I believe that too. But it requires us to be present with them and to get over the hurt or maybe the disgust or whatever it is that comes up for us in that moment.
The only enemy we have is our ego. And I think that's the beautiful thought of the Stoic philosophy, that the ego is the enemy. And if you can release yourself even for a few minutes from your ego, because we need an ego. So that's no discussion. But if you can release yourself a little bit from that ego, and see an obstacle, you can go with the obstacle together. But you have to leave your ego a little bit. And some people told me, you can't put yourself away. No, that's right. But you can make a choice to be connected with the other. That's a choice. Yeah. And if you make that choice, you can put it aside for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a conscious choice. That's true.
Yeah, it's really a conscious choice. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Another topic regarding to listening. I watched a TED talk of William Ury about the power of listening. Maybe you've seen it also. And he mentioned that in order to listen to the other side, we too have to listen to ourselves too. And he suggests taking a moment to be quiet, where we just listen to ourselves and where we feel and hear what we need and where we are in that moment. What are your thoughts on this process, and would you agree about the importance of listening? I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway, of listening to oneself, and how can we better do that? How can we better listen to ourselves? And maybe in the process, noticing, tying it back to our last topic, realizing that sometimes we have to put that ego to the side and actually choose to focus with the upset or whatever it is of the other person.
Yeah, yeah. I think that in listening, you are your own instrument. So the better you know yourself, the better listener you can become. Although you can never say, I'm a good listener. It's always the speaker who feels heard who can say you're a good listener. But knowing yourself, knowing your assumptions, knowing your morals is very important in listening. And what he is talking about in his TED talk, I call it clearing my listening. And clearing my listening means that I take a few minutes or a few seconds, if you don't have a lot of time, to experience, how do I feel at this moment? And the person I will listen to in our next meeting or our next encounter, what are my thoughts about this person? Do I like him? Do I don't like him? Do I think I already know what he will share with me or not? Being aware of these thoughts, but also in my work, it's a lot about grief and loss and death. I need to know my morals, and I need to know that my morals will not be the same as the person I will listen to. Maybe they are, but maybe they don't. So listening to yourself, in my experience, is being aware of yourself, being aware of your pain, being aware of your tiredness, being aware of who you are as a human being. And being aware and accepting that this is who you are right now at this moment, and eventually maybe sharing that with the other can make you be a better listener. Sometimes in a conversation, I said, I need to stop because I can't listen anymore, because I am sad, or I need to cry, or and when I start feeling emotions, I have to be alert that it will not become about me, but I need to stay with the other. So sometimes I say, can we just have a small break to reset myself?
Yeah, because you can't fully stay present in that moment.
Yeah, and I think, but that's my assumption, that is what he means when he talk about that in his talk.
I recognize that we're at a time constraint. It's 1 minute past 12, so we're already over the deadline. I have 3 more questions. Do we still have time for that?
I have till 12:15, so
okay,
let's go for it.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is actually an important question, and it might be a complicated one too. And it's another question regarding listening to ourselves. There's an author, David Grossman, and he has this concept which he identified, or what he talked about, of our primal story. And the primal story is the story that we tell about ourselves to new people that we meet, to other people. And I'm kind of intrigued and fascinated by this concept of our primal story, because I recognize that, I mean, I do this too. We all do this. And I also recognize that it's built on impactful experiences from the past, which in many cases are no longer relevant today or no longer impacting us today. Yet still, we carry this story forward. And I don't know, I think because of continuous repetition and polishing of this story by continuously using it, or it determines our identity and it determines who we are becoming. And I know that I do this, we as individuals do this, as groups we do this, as cultures. This is maybe also related to Nederland luistert, you know, this we all do this, and I very much recognize how this affects our lives. And now here's my question. How can we learn to listen to ourselves and potentially others when we and them share this primal story about ourselves or about themselves, so that we can filter out the old, so to speak, and how can we help them get past things that maybe no longer serves us or them, or how can we help ourselves and others? Big question, I recognize.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's my assumption that we most of the time introduce ourselves about what we are and not who we are. So for me, that's the first. We tell what we are doing, how we earn money, but who we are is a totally different question. And if you focus on the who you are, you can never share the same story, because you're changing after every encounter. So we create something which will give us a good image of ourselves, because we don't know if we are safe. We don't know who the other person is, what he wants from us. But that story is mostly not the real who am I story.
Yes.
But the who am I, sometimes we don't know who we are. Also, we don't know who we are at the moment. And sometimes we really don't know who we are. I'm still finding out who I am.
Yes. Yeah.
So we create something that is true, but it is not layered. And we don't share the layers because do we always want to share all our layers? I don't know. So when we are at a reception or something else, it's about small talk. So we create a small talk narrative about ourselves. And that's a choice. It's all about the choice. I have to admit, I don't like sharing my who am I during a reception or a party. I can share it one by one, but not when there are more people around or when it's crowded or stuff like that. And sometimes I don't think it's really necessary that people, well, most of the time, I don't think it's very necessary that people know me in that depth. And that's why we talk a lot about the what and not about the who. But when we just talk about the non-directive way of communication, if we ask people, do you know who you are? I think a lot of people who are honest say, I don't know, I'm still finding out.
Yeah.
And when the years, I am 53 right now, and I think at the age of 30, I thought, well, I am grown up. Yeah. I'm an adult right now.
Things out.
Yeah. And now I'm 53 and I'm thinking, oh my dear Lord, how many years do I have to find out who I am? Yeah. So, you know, things are changing, and maybe we have to be honest and say, I'm not really sure who I am at the moment. Yeah. I'm okay, or I had stuff like that. Yeah. I think it's also very powerful to say, I don't know, or well, today it is not so good. And you know, when I have a lot of friends in the United States, and I learned from them that most of the Americans ask, how are you, just to ask a question. Yeah. Yeah. And if you say, I'm not so good, they were not listening anymore, because that was not.
Oh, great. Yeah.
It was not a reason they asked the question. Yeah. So it's cultural, and in the Netherlands, we have a very directive way of communicating. Yeah. But being very vulnerable, a lot of people say, oh, come on, do we really need to know that all? Mm-hmm. Just keep it to yourself, or keep it to your siblings, but not to me. So I think it's cultural, and at least in Asia, I traveled a lot in Asia. People don't say who they are. Yeah. They don't. Yeah. They talk about what they are doing in life, but that's totally different. Well, it can be totally different. It can be the same, but most of the time it's not the same. Yeah. Yeah. So I can't answer it because I don't know.
Yeah, we're also figuring that out.
Yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey. Yeah. And I'm lost in that journey sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Well, this is actually something, I mean, I'm fascinated by it. I'm trying to interview David Grossman about it himself. I'd love to pick his brain on it, but I've already contacted 2 agents, and it's a person hard to connect with. Yeah, yeah. I think this is a very important topic that of researching. Yeah. When we listen, I believe in many cases this is the situation. There's a lot of things that are not being said. So how can we learn to listen between the words and to listen to what's not being said? And would you have any tips on how to do that? How can we listen to what's between the lines?
Well, I think most of the time there is something between the lines, but sometimes there's not. And especially women are thinking there's always something between the lines, especially when they listen to a man. And I think if a man or a person is sharing a story and there is something between the lines, but he's not sharing that, just leave it there. Yeah. We just need to accept that it's not there, or that there are no words, or there is no thoughts, or it's not the right time, or stuff like that. So you have to be very cautious with trying to understand between the lines. Yeah. And when you notice there is something between the line, you can ask, is there something more you would like to share? And then stay silent. Yeah. And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. Yeah. And if you see that a person is thinking about how to express it, just stay silent. Yeah. And then the words came up. We have to accept that people process emotions, every emotion, in their own way and in their own time. And sometimes you notice that there is something, but when the speaker is not ready to share it, don't push it. Yeah. Don't, because it's not up to you. It's up to the other. But if you feel and see there is something going on, or there is more, and you ask, is there something more? And they say no, and you still stay silent, sometimes they open up.
Yeah, I think what you said is maybe one of the most important things to listening is indeed to just shut up sometimes. Or not sometimes, we need to shut up much more, actually many times. But indeed to just be quiet. And it's always, or in many cases, it's an uncomfortable quiet and an uncomfortable silence, but we need to move through it. And there is almost always gold at the end of the silence. Yeah.
It's listening is not being silent, but you
No.
need to be silent sometimes in the listening.
Yes. Yeah. Last question, and this is a question that I always like to end with. Thank you, by the way, for all of the wisdom and the experience that you've shared so far. It's been really interesting. I would love to talk actually much more, but I recognize there's a time constraint. But one last question is, what question about listening didn't I ask, which I definitely should have asked? It's also a difficult question, but.
Well, I think it's important to share that I know a lot about listening, but that I'm not a good listener all the time. And people, well, I see sometimes people putting on LinkedIn, I'm a listener, I'm an expert in listening. It's not up to you to say that you are a good listener. And you can't be always a good listener. I can listen 2 or 3 times a day in a very good conversation, and then it's over, ending over. And still, I can think that I listen quite well. But if you don't feel heard, I didn't do a good job. So don't ever say that people are good listeners always, because they can't be. And I know that people say sometimes listening gives you energy. Yes, it can give you mental energy, but it costs a lot of energy. Yes. So maybe that's not a question, but that was something I really would like to express, because people are a lot confused about knowing a lot about listening or being a good listener.
Well, maybe the question then would have been, are you always a good listener? And then the answer
no.
would have been
no. No, I'm not.
But yeah, great point. And I think we should all be aware that indeed listening, whether or not we're a good listener, depends on the person who's speaking that we're listening to. Or person.
And the context.
Corine, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it and enjoyed our talk.
Thank you, Julius.
Yes, and I will send you some more links, because I have quite some thoughts that came up because of our conversation that I feel will be interesting for me to share with you. So I'll follow up with that.
Lovely. Great.
And I'd love to stay in touch, and hope, because we're both in Holland now, so perhaps we meet one time would be really great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your interest in listening, and thank you for listening and asking good questions, Julius.
Thank you. You're very welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
And have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.